The other big concept you need to understand in depth for security and risk management is IAAA: identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability. It is, like most of the other things here, pretty straightforward. What do we allow people to use to identify themselves? How do we allow them to authenticate they are who they say they are? Once they're authenticated, what do they get access to? What are they authorized to? And then finally, accountability. They're accountable for the action taken while using their login. We use many different things for identification. It can be your name, username, user ID, employee number, social security number. It's basically saying, I'm Thor. And then when we go to the authentication, they want you to prove you're Thor. And as a best practice, we always want to use multi-factor authentication. The first three of these I would know stone cold. Type 1 authentication is something you know. It's also called the knowledge base factor. It's passphrases, passwords, pins, something where you're proving you're you by the knowledge you have. Type 2 authentication is something you have in your possession. This can be IDs, passports, smart cards, tokens. It could even be a cookie on your PC. And then type 3 authentication. This is also called biometrics. Something you are. Something that's physically unique to you. Your fingerprint scan, your iris, your facial geometry, your ear geometry. Anything that can be used to identify you by your characteristics. I would also know type 4 authentication, somewhere you are. And type 5, something you do. I wouldn't spend very much time on them, just understand what they are. Somewhere you are, that could be your IP address or your MAC address. We could set filtering up for that. If you log in from your home PC with using your home IP, you can access the network. Whereas someone else using your username and login but logging in from a completely different country might be blocked. And then something you do, it can be the way you sign your name, the swipes you do on your phone to unlock it. It has before been used as a type 3 authentication, but has been segmented out now into its own. Whereas the biometrics rarely change over time unless something drastic happens. How you sign your name, how you type on a keyboard, or how you unlock your phone can change over time. The last two A's of the IAAA is authorization. What are you allowed to access once you have proven you are who you say you are? For that, we're going to use access control models. Which type and how we implement is depending on our organization and what our security goals are. There are different models where integrity is more important, or confidentiality, or availability. We're going to cover these models a lot more in Domain 5, Identity and Access Management. For this domain, just understand the concept. What are people allowed to access once they've proven who they are? The final A is normally accountability, but it can also be referred to as auditing. We trace an action to a subject's identity. If someone logs in from your IP address with your username and password, you can with a reasonable degree of certainty say you logged in. You can't really deny it. This provides non-repudiation. I also want to give a little caution here. A lot of IT security professionals think they are the most important part of the organization, just like many of the other parts of the organization think they are. And we are somewhat different than most of the other parts because we span the whole organization. But what we're there for is to help the organization fulfill its mission and the business goals they have. We're there to enable them. We're both business leaders and security leaders, and when you take the exam, answer the exam wearing both hats. I really like the analogy of one of the janitors of NASA. When someone asked, "What do you do?" he said, "I help put people on the moon." In reality, he does. If he didn't take out the trash, it would pile up, people would get sick, people wouldn't go to the moon. We need that well-oiled machinery to make our organization work, and IT security needs to be part of that. We're there to enable the rest of the organization to do the best they can. And then in turn, we also have a bad image sometimes. IT security is just there to make it more difficult. That's what we do on the front lines. We go out, we communicate with people. We explain why we're doing what we're doing, talk to them in their language, and make them see the reasoning behind it. Let's go over some of the important elements of this and add a couple of new ones. Least privilege. We give employees exactly what they need access to and nothing else. This way we ensure they don't access anything they're not allowed to. In a lot of organizations, that's not sustainable, because every time they need access to something else, we need to keep tweaking it. So many places we give them more access than they actually need in case they do, but then we implement need to know. You need to have a valid reason for accessing the data when you do, and if you don't, you shouldn't be accessing it. If you do, there'll be consequences. Throughout this course and through the exam, you're going to see subjects and objects a lot. Very clearly understand what both are and how they work together. Subjects are active. These are most often users, but they can also be programs. And subjects manipulate objects. They use them, they alter them. whereas objects are passive. This is often data, but it can be both physical paper data or it can be electronic. The important part is the object is manipulated by the subject. And understand that some can be both, just not at the same time. A program can be both. When it's shut down and not in use, it's an object. Other programs can manipulate it. And when it's active, it's a subject. It manipulates other programs or other data. So clearly understand subjects and objects.